one thing I think I see with a lot of people is they make like prototype apps that are it doesn't look good. It doesn't look like an actual product and nothing changes because it only changes when I change it. So it's the worst part of the whole process because if you screw it up and it's a total black box. Like what's going on is there's these systems that running on Apple's servers. They're looking at the contents of your app bundle and they're like, we like this, we like that. Well, we don't like that, but like we don't know why. I've learned that trying to make a game based on just a funny joke is probably not the best approach because like then there's what's the depth?
Hello everyone, my name is Łukasz and this is the Łukasz Podcast. Today I am joined for the second time on this show by Ted Bendixson, the creator of the Sokoban puzzle game Mooselutions. If you're interested in C++ development on Windows but in Neovim, or how he made his build pipeline for iOS from scratch to avoid touching Xcode, join us. Let's do an overview of Mooselutions and then we'll dive into the experience of porting this game. And
Yeah, sure. So let's see. A few years ago, I was working at a job and uh, a mobile app job, and so while I was doing that, I did actually a game jam before I started that, and I was using some leftover code from a previous game prototype that I had written, which goes back like 5 years ago to me following along with Handmade Hero. So the really long arc of it is like I started following Handmade Hero, and then as is everybody on this like show that comes on, they follow Handmade Hero for like 50 episodes, and then they're like, "Oh, I think I know enough to make a game." And then they go and start experimenting. And so I had a number of different prototypes of different game concepts. And Moose Solutions was sort of the first one that I made that people would actually play for
it's a good
some
sign.
period of time. Well, I mean, it's to be expected. Like, most game prototypes you make are going to be weird ideas that people are going to like. So it was the first, game jam one that I made that people actually liked. I got to about 50 some puzzles. And then I was like, I still try to make new puzzles. Like I do sit down with pen and paper sometimes and I'm like, would that fit the game? And um, I haven't really had any like new ones, a lot of new ones. So I feel like that resource is probably exhausted at this point. But long story short, I finished. I decided to finish that game, which is just take whatever content I had made, all the puzzles, and improve the quality of the graphics. Improve, put in a bunch more nice to haves in terms of user interface, user experience, that kind of thing, settings, menus, all that stuff. And then I put it on Steam last year, about a year ago. And so after that point, I um, just kind of took a break and then started prototyping new game ideas. And then roughly around this fall, I got into a game festival and I decided that one of the things I would do for that is port it to iOS as well. So
Okay.
that's how I got down this Apple rabbit hole.
Okay. So before we dive there, Mooselutions, if you're awaiting by any chance the Sokoban game from Jonathan Blow, a great Sokoban puzzle game to play in the meantime, you can download it, you can buy it on Steam. What are
Yep.
the other platforms?
Right now it's on Steam, it's on the Mac App Store, and it's also on the iOS App Store. So
Right.
I got those 3 platforms. I don't know if I'll do another, if maybe if I start getting much more sales, I'll do it, but for now, I feel like that's kinda good.
Okay. So let's talk about the experience of porting this, but before we jump right there,
Yeah.
t- you started as an iOS developer and
Yeah,
then you
that's true.
started making games. So maybe tell a little bit of the story of how you got into iOS.
Yeah, sure. So iOS stuff goes back a long time ago. I was in my 20s and I don't know if everybody knows this, but like I was basically a snowboard bum in my 20s and I still continue to. I'm not like a snow I can't really justify being a snowboard bum anymore. Like not
Can you define snowboard
what
bum?
is a
What
snowboard bum?
yeah.
Um somebody that like they live in ski resort towns, and they really their whole life is just for snowboarding. Like, that's every
Okay.
you work jobs or whatever, everything you do is just so that you can go snowboarding, and
Okay.
so in my 20s, that was my obsession, and it still loosely is, like, I still really love to do it, but so, I worked a bunch of, like, ski resort jobs, I worked food service, I was a freelance writer. I basically found, like, any kind of thing that I could to fund snowboarding, and so I actually kinda got back because I studied software in college for, briefly, and then I got back into software as a way of funding my snowboarding habit by, 'cause I came up with an app idea for snowboarding. I might still have it on my phone. Um, so it's called Snow Dice, and what it is it's a random trick yeah, so I still have it. Here it is. This is
Show
Snow
it.
Di
Show it for in the middle. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is my very first iPhone app, and so what it does is you shake your phone, and then it gives you a random trick to try on
Nice.
terrain park jumps if you are that sort of person, if you are so inclined. And it's got a bunch of other things like if I don't know what like front side is, I can tap on that and I can read about it. And then it's got settings. So like if I was really crazy and I wanted to like it's even got like I got kind of carried away with it because like I was like, "Oh, let's have it have every trick that you could possibly do as a snowboarder." And so it's got, like, all the way up to well, actually, at the time now this app probably doesn't even cover everything because somebody just landed a 2340. So, like, I had it go up to, like, 1620s, but I guess now people can do 2340s, so I better change my app. So,
Uh,
that was my first iPhone app from
okay.
a
And
long
now
time ago.
you managed to update it for those years to come now. Like,
Yeah, so that's originally what I was thinking, perhaps incorrectly when I started was this will be quote unquote passive income, right? I w- I will make this app and then it will just passively, pay me some amount of money. And I like the app, like I love it, I'm happy to sell it, all that stuff. But the thing is like passive income is kind of a lie because well, it's just true, like, as a young I was in my 20s, I was like, "Oh, that makes sense, like, I just put it up there and then, like, I get money." And well, actually, no, because there's all this maintenance that's
yeah,
involved in any kind of product that you even if and this product, like, is, like, the lowest maintenance I could think of, it's, like, literally all the content is static, it's just in there, it's, like, you're not going to a web service or any stuff like that, like, there's it's as low maintenance as possible, but, Apple comes up with new phones and they even have a thing where if you don't update your app for like 3 years, then eventually you get a nasty email that's like, "Hey, we're gonna take you down," and then you
and
gotta
there's new
update.
law, new law, and you need to check whether this app contains drugs or some sort of
Yeah.
other app.
Yeah, and then you
Yeah,
gotta, like, come up with, like, a website with a privacy policy, and then you gotta, like, all of those all those things that are a part of it. So I decided, okay, well, this is my business. I will just continue to keep it updated. It's not that much work. Like, it still is mostly passive, but I think if you were to actually, like, calculate how much money I make, it's kind of like that one day of work that I have to do every few years is, like, kind of like I roughly get paid, what I get paid from the app is roughly like salary for that one day of work that it takes to update them. So it's a bit of a wash. I'm probably losing actually, but maybe it's more of a point of pride.
yeah, I guess so at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, so you started this app, and then at some point you were doing consulting and
Yeah.
iOS development as service, right?
Yeah, so making the app actually kinda got me to a point where I had a profile or a portfolio or something that I could actually show people, and I guess, like, if you're watching this kind of thinking, "Hey, how do I get a job in software industry?" or really any kind of thing, I think having some kind of, like, solid portfolio of saying, "Look, here's the thing that you want. I actually did the thing, and it looks good." It's not like just a like one thing I think I see with a lot of people is they make like prototype apps that are it doesn't look good. It doesn't look like an actual product. And so I would say if you're going to try and put a portfolio together, it should also be reasonably polished, right? You should like hire an artist and like all that stuff. And then you can show people and be like, look, here's a real product. You want something like that? I can do that. And so I started getting people, I was able to apply to jobs, and then I also got people coming to me that were like, "Hey, can you make this app?" Or we want something like this, etc. And so that's how I got into that business. And I did that for a while, and that's how I got a lot of the experience doing iPhone apps. And so this naturally segues, I guess, into some of the next topics about.
Yes, exactly. So now from iOS, then you switched, like you stopped doing iOS, and we talked about this last time, right? When you stopped doing iOS and then went into game development and the
Yeah,
Mooselutions.
yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of that was um, I started out wanting to just make products. So what I wanted to make products that you could put on the App Store. And eventually, after I sort of exhausted a lot of the ideas for iOS apps, I was like, I kind of fell out of love with the sorts of things that do really well on iOS, or like the kinds of apps that are popular. Or I felt like the platform just I think this is a problem with a lot of people that get into iOS app development. Like they're in a box, but they don't realize that they're like in a box. And
What do
so
you
it's
what do you mean?
well, it's like every idea that they think of is like it's only works for the iOS ecosystem. It's like only for the phones. It's and so but they can't think more broadly about, hey, software is like actually meant to run on a lot of different platforms. And like, what if I had a product that was not just limited to this one device, but actually like, I could run it on Windows, and I could run it on my PlayStation, etc. So Android phones, you name it. Just this idea that I'm only going to make an iPhone app. I started to get kind of frustrated with that. I thought it was kind of like too limiting, and so I eventually wanted to just break out of that box of only, marketing myself as a person that just does this one platform. And so for me, aside from like having obviously an interest in games, games were that thing, right? Because it's a necessary prerequisite for games, really, especially in this day and age, that they run on, like, everything. And so you get to solve that problem.
Okay. Tell us a little bit how Moosolutions is made in terms of technology, so that once we get into the porting stuff, then we know
Yeah.
like what are we porting from.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I started out, I basically took Handmade Hero and just sort of, like, tried to turn it into a game, is, like, how that all happened. And so, obviously, Handmade Hero as a starting point is great in a lot of respects, but then it's also trying to do different things than it's an educational resource, right? So, most of that's why he spends so much time going through software rendering and all of this stuff, right? So, you're actually, like, really learning how uh, what your GPU is actually doing, right? But it's a very different goal from if you were to just make a game out of it. Because instead of doing the software rendering, what you would do is you would hook it up to like DirectX 11 or something like that, or on a different platform like Mac OS, you would hook it up to Metal. So I basically just used Handmade Hero as a starting point, and then I was like, okay, Casey made these decisions, right? I'm going to make these other decisions because this is not an educational resource. This is a game, and I'm going to. So with that on Windows, I basically just use DirectX 11, and it's very similar in terms of how it to Handmade Hero, but it uses a lot of the more advanced things like VSync to make sure that um, we're synced with the monitor when we're blitting to the frame to the window, etc. So in terms of those kinds of things, it's more more like just a regular game. There's no software rendering component or anything like that. And then on Mac OS, so when I was first starting, I originally started on Mac OS, oddly enough. So I was trying to follow Handmade Hero. Casey does it on Windows, but I do it on Mac OS. Or I was doing it on Mac OS because that was the only computer that I had. And so I was kind of like figuring all of that out. I was like, okay, Casey does this video on Windows. And I was like, okay, there's got to be some equivalent thing on Mac OS. And so then I just went and figured out what that was. And then I got something that was roughly close to that. And then it was a similar thing when it came down to like rendering technologies. So on Mac OS, I just used Metal, because I use that because Apple more or less suggests that that's where what everybody should move to now. And I actually found it much simpler to set up. I also found it kind of easier to work with in a lot of other ways. So
Can we do
then
a can we
compared
do
to
a
like
seg
open.
can we do a segue? Why metal would be would be easier to
Oh,
work with?
uh, I think just like easier. I think it provided a bunch of more convenience APIs for me compared to like OpenGL. So I think that was my other choice was OpenGL or Vulkan or any of those. And so just in terms of, because it was a bit of a choice, it was like, do I support these separate renderers on separate operating systems, right? Or do I try and go with something that's more unifying? But at the end of the day, I think I picked DirectX and Metal because they were actually, even though I had to do all the extra work, there's more convenience APIs and it was like easier to set up. And so that's kind of why I went with that choice.
Okay.
Um, and maybe a little bit of was like that was what I, you know, could find resources on. And so I, that's what I did.
Okay, okay. I interrupted your flow of the
No, no,
story.
no, no, absolutely no problem.
So you were saying that you were doing on macOS with Metal handmade hero version of the game you wanted to do, skipping some of the parts like the
Yeah,
software render parts, for example, into more like hardware rendering, so using GPU and then doing
yeah.
Mooselutions and doing this like from scratch in C++.
Yeah, basically. So C++ was I know that I think at the time Odin and Raylib were like a thing as well. And of course you could have gotten like a beta of Jai at that point as well. But my thinking was I'm just going to use off the shelf stuff that um where I don't have to get kind of a beta license, it's not in development. And then my thought was um I want to experience all the problems that C++ has. Like, just so that I understand it, so I understand maybe, like, what the conversation is all about. If I can experience, what it is that we're complaining about, then maybe I might, uh
That's a good strategy to first learn, then to know what to complain about instead of complaining
well
about like it's like, oh, it's so bad. Never use that, but it's really
well,
bad.
and I yeah, that's sort of like another segue about, like, a lot of conversations that take place in software development. I feel like a lot of times, um, people that I discuss these things with, it's like, okay, you say that alternative is bad, but have you actually like tried it? Have you actually like sat down and like legit now, in all fairness, people's lives are busy. They have children to raise. They've got dogs to take potty, as I do. They've got things going on. And so I am completely understanding as to why people wouldn't have the time to try some other way of doing it. Like I completely get it. But I feel like if you're actually going to try to criticize a particular position or a particular way of doing something, you should have at least dedicated maybe a couple of years or like some serious time trying that approach out just to see where the cracks are. And so I guess part of for me, what some of this was just like as an engineer, like what I found interesting about it was okay, like let's test Uncle Bob's claims. Uncle Bob says function should only be 20 lines or whatever. Like, he says all these things about, like why procedural programming is bad. And, or, I hear all these things about, why object oriented programming is so great and why you shouldn't just, write a 1,000 line function or whatever. And for me, this project was like a way to test that too, just to be like, okay, is anybody? What does it really look like when I make one of these things? How much time does it actually take? Like, is there any truth to this claim? Again, I just me going and trying it on myself anecdotally is not going to give us enough evidence. Obviously, like I think if you were to support any of these really big claims that people try to make about, this ideology is good or bad, or like this dogmatic stance is good or bad, you need, I don't know, some kind of like randomized controlled trial where like we have like teams producing the same thing and they're all doing, like this team composed of roughly this same group of competent people doing it this way versus a similarly composed team of competent people doing it that way, compare results. Like it's to test any of these claims is so difficult. That's why nobody does it. They would rather just write a book and make, money as a consultant. So
Yeah.
long-winded rant, but like part of it was to like just say, okay, like I want to understand what these problems are. But then like sort of as a side thing, I feel like I never actually fully got to experience all of the rot that is C++ because I kind of started agreeing too much with Casey and with Jonathan Blow and with Ginger Bill about, what the problems are. And so I ended up just not using a lot of C++. So there's this like all this whole vast swathes of C++ that I don't understand, that I don't really even know anything about, but I am aware that people know things about it and they have opinions about it. Yeah, like I don't think I've ever done this. This sounds. I write C++. I've never done inheritance with C++. I've like
Oh,
actually just never done it.
okay.
Like I know it's there. I know it's a thing that one can do, but I have not done it.
And you
I
can do
think that
it. You can do
what's
it in
that?
four. You can do it in four different ways. You can have like different ways of inheriting because that's the cool part about C++. Not only you have inheritance, you have four kinds of it.
And I'm aware that there's like the move constructor, the copy constructor, and like that these are problematic in some ways. But then I'm like, I don't do any of that because I just like allocate all the memory up front. So like, you know, I I just work with structs for the most part, and so I use memory arenas like what Ryan Fleury does, and so there's what's been funny about it is like I can look at that now and I can compare it to what I am doing presently in my projects, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I obviously wouldn't do any of those things. I wouldn't even be tempted. And I guess maybe I had some experience with I definitely got a lot of experience with object-oriented programming from, doing iOS apps because that's all the kits are object-oriented, and even if you're doing Swift UI right now, which is sort of like the new thing, um, it still relies on this old object-oriented way of doing things. So it tries to be functional, but actually it's still very married to object-oriented concepts. It's almost like the Swift programming language is carrying this object-oriented baggage with it that it's just not willing to relinquish because of all this compatibility organism. And I'm just like, oh, like that's not really any better than C++, aside from like this is what Apple people like. So here we are.
Okay. So you were doing Mooselutions in C++ with Metal on Mac, and at
Yeah.
some point you switched to Windows. You said bye bye Xcode at least for now, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
to Neovim on Windows.
Oh, you can use Neovim on Mac OS as well.
Oh yeah,
And so
yeah.
I actually,
But have you used one?
oh, what's that?
Have you used Neovim on macOS for the development?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
so oh, man, text editor talk, okay. So what I do actually is I run, I'm probably gonna get hate from some people about, "Oh, DLM, it's so
Oh,
slow."
of course. Like you can't
You're
have a
right.
good opinion that everybody would agree with. Like it
Yeah,
is.
like, you're right, it's slow, it sucks. I agree, okay, I agree. But what I like, and I like if I had a much faster version that like wasn't was not if I had something that was better, I would obviously use it. But I don't want to. I just have not gotten around to solving that problem really. But what I like about it is it's at least to me a unified development environment that's the same on every operating system that you're running it on. So on Windows, it's the same experience, like because you can access the terminal from Neovim as well. And so you can run terminal commands in there and you can like put the output into your text file or whatever. So there's a lot of it's all basically the same. And so I can have the same setup on my Windows machine as I have on my Mac. And so when I just go over to Mac, it's a very similar kind of development process. And so I do indeed use Neovim on Mac OS, and I don't even use Xcode at all as a text editor for software development.
Okay.
So, in the spirit of like Handmade Hero, I do not use Xcode. I only use Xcode as a debugger. I wish I had a better option, but that's what I use. And
Okay.
so, and I don't use it as a build system either. And I have a lot of opinions about why I don't think Xcode is a good build system either, which we can go into. Uh,
We can do it after the porting. After the
yes,
porting discussion, I think it will be chronologically better. Okay, so can we linger a bit on this? Because like I used Neovim on Windows, and I felt
yeah.
like maybe I'm like second or third person to do it. Like it's not that.
Am I
Uh,
the fourth?
and then like, and
Yeah,
then like, we might be the only two to have ever
we
like
might.
tried it.
Yeah,
You know,
we
like.
could be. Yeah,
So, what's your experience of doing Neovim on Windows and C++, which is also an odd choice for Neovim in general?
yeah. I think I got some kind of. Um, well, first of all, like I think Neovim gets more and more complicated and slow the more that you like rely on the newer um, versions. And so if you follow some of those like newer tutorials, um, I feel like they push the average user in a direction that's like, hey, just just gobble up all those dependencies and just and have it automatically format your code and have it do all this stuff for you. And I tried that because I was like, oh, new shiny new things, It's kind of like an upgrade. And I thought that was so good, or I thought it would be nice. But then all of a sudden I would be in the middle of editing a file and it's like, I hit tab and now I'm like 8 spaces over and I'm like, what happened? And like why and it's like auto formatting all this stuff for me. And so then I ripped all of that crap out. I got so annoyed. And I just went back to the basics of, treating it almost like it's just Vim with some really basic setup, none of the automated packages. And I think I have like one package for formatting code for C++, plus plus, and that's about it. And so I think if you went too much in that like super automated route, it makes it a lot slower because it's got to, to run all those packages or whatever, it's got to go through all these extra layers of software to figure out how to auto format your stuff. So I just turn all that off. And
Okay.
I think that's a more pleasant experience.
Okay. So you're like plugin less development in C++ with LSP?
No, I don't use any of that. Um,
Okay.
I just like what I do. It sounds uh, I just I know where all my functions are and like where my stuff is, and so I kind of don't really need it. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I'll have the file that the function I'm referencing is located in, and then I know what line that's on. And so then I just copy like the little function stub, and then I just paste that into my wherever I want to use it. And so, and if I don't, explicitly know where that is, then I have like some little like grep commands or whatever that I can just run from the terminal. That'll tell me roughly where to find it if I've lost or can't figure out where it is. And so I
Okay.
really don't like any of these. Um, I find that it gets in the way more than it helps. And so, and I actually think a lot of the text editing really is not the bottleneck with most of this stuff. So, most I think the hardest part of game development, I would say, is the design, is actually thinking of, like, what is going in the game. That's the hardest part. The programming is still very difficult, and still there are a number of problems you're gonna solve. It is hard, but it's not as hard as design. So I would say, like, that's where the real bottleneck lies, and that's where I try and put most of my effort. Um, Trying to have fancy packages that, figure out what the functions are to call and all this stuff. It's kinda like, no, I mean, if I know where that stuff is for the most part. I can find it, and it's just not really that big of a deal to me. So, it's my preferred, um yeah, very I don't know, maybe I'm getting cranky or something, but
I think it helps, like you're working solo on a project, so there is no like
hmm,
growing code base that you don't know. So
there is yeah, so that's the other thing too is, like, I think, it was a different interview, and I actually really I've watched some of the interviews with, the guy that made Animal Well,
yeah,
and one of the
Billy
things I
Basso.
really yeah, Billy Basso, that's right. Um, One of the things I love about he mentioned how his style of work is one of deep calm, and maybe he used those words, maybe not, but it was something like, stuff just does not change. Like, there's no such thing as, like, updating a dependency. There's literally, I put my work down today, I come back, maybe I go on a long snowboarding trip, so I just get lost in this vortex of jumps and snowboarding, and I come back and nothing changes, 'cause it only changes when I change it. That's how that works, right? So, like, I like it when things only change because I changed it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
And
That's
that's
cool.
it's calming. It's a very, it's I want an enjoyable work experience. I want to enjoy the work. I don't wanna have my day, like, sidelined by, some company over there decided that or this package got updated or somebody decided. Like, that to me was the most frustrating thing about working in industry, was that we just all kind of casually accept that Apple's gonna update something and it's gonna ruin our day. And we're just like, we just go along with it. And it's like, no, we don't have to go along with it. Like, we really don't. It's a conscious decision.
Okay. Okay. Here's the picture. Neovim, C++ with code that is like multi-platform in terms of Metal and DirectX, developed on Windows, a Neovim with no plugins. And at some point you say, okay, now this desktop game, PC game, I'm turning
Mhm.
into a mobile. I'm gonna port it to iOS.
Yeah.
So before we dive into technical aspects, how do you think of this process in terms of like design aspects? Because a lot of a lot of things change, right?
Yeah, so I one thing that was nice about this particular game, and I also think that it's a great thing about the Sokoban game genre, generally speaking. One, it's very turn-based, and so it's very much about, if I make a move, the whole board kinda responds. It's one turn at a time. It's very discrete in terms of the movements. It's not really an action game. So, basically anything in that genre, even if it has action in it, like, obviously my games I wanna give an example that's not my game. So, like, a Monsters Expedition, for exa is another Sokoban game. Really great game, probably better than mine, definitely better than mine, but still. Um, it's so you've got, like, this monster that can, like, roll a log, right? And, like, the log is action, right? So, like, one of the like, the consequence of one of your moves is you push this log across all these tiles, right? And then it goes into the water. Um, and that animation, right, that's like one turn. That all happens in one turn. It's, like, probably just a linear interpolation animation. And it's not like, that action is not done with physics or anything like that. It's just that you did a turn and then this thing happened, and then you get to watch it happen. And it goes turn by turn by turn like that. And so I think that kind of game is actually very natural for a mobile device, because one of the frustrations I think with the touch-based controls I think it's just you can straight up say that touch-based controls will never be as good as tactile holding a control like a game controller in your hand, because you can just feel where the buttons are, you know where they are, so you can react much more quickly. And so that makes it much more, compatible with action type games, just because you don't have this problem. Versus, I think the kind of game that works really well on a mobile device is something a little more thought out, a little bit more, strategic, a little bit more slow, relaxing, something like chess, something where it's, one turn at a time. It's like there's no action in it at all. Like, your reaction time doesn't really matter that much. And so, you still have to have some kind of controls, right? And you have to have some kinda, like, touch-based control, but really all the touch-based controls are doing is maybe you're using gestures to figure out, what direction to, like, move the player, or using some touch controls, like some buttons to undo your last move, or, like, redo the puzzle, or, restart the puzzle, that kind of thing. So, I think one of the reasons I ported it to iOS is just because it's the kind of game that I think works really well on that platform. If it weren't the kind of game that works well on that platform, I don't think I would have ported it there. If that makes sense.
Okay, okay. That's true. I didn't realize this, that the action part might not necessarily translate well to the mobile stuff because of the buttons.
So maybe there have been innovations in touchscreen interfaces that like have figured out or cracked this problem, but I generally speaking, the games that I play on a iOS device, I don't really like to play a lot of um action games on it. Like if I'm gonna play an action game, it's gonna be like Elden Ring and I've got my nice controller and I'm at my gaming PC and like we're in hardcore mode here. Like that's that's how I feel about it.
What about like the differences in terms of screen and input and like more technically speaking, when you're starting to port the game from PC, then you need to think through all the other dimensions that go into this.
Yeah, so the screen is a lot smaller. That is probably where I spent most of my time was, figuring out a new camera system for the game. So, on PC, because I just assume that the screen is huge, because most people's PCs have really large screens, I could actually fit the entire puzzle just into the whole screen, and so you could always see the whole thing, and this was one of my initial hesitations in porting the game to iOS was thinking, "Oh gosh, um, I think if I tried to do the same thing on mobile, it just would look terrible." Right? So because it's all squished in, it's like, you could technically see it, but then, I even think that due to the dimensions of some of the screens, there would have even been, like, downsampling on the textures, and so it just would not have it would just look like absolute garbage. And so I had to come up with a camera system where I decide like what's the smallest sort of tile size that I want to have that is at least, like big enough to where you can see all the detail and the characters and textures and whatnot. And then what I did was I was like, I know that I'm not going to be able to fit the entire puzzle into the frame. That's just not really going to work. But what I can do is I can have a camera. I originally started with a camera that just follows the player in the center of the screen, but then that was not really good enough because when the player goes to the edge of the screen, like like let's say he goes to the bottom of to the bottom of the puzzle or to the top of the puzzle or like maybe the sides of the puzzle, then, most of what's on the screen is just, like, the side area of the puzzle, and so that's not really good either. Because like, what I wanna do is mostly keep the puzzle in the middle of the frame, but not have it so that, um, you know, not have us looking at, the edges of the puzzle for the most part. So, what I finally settled on was sort of a system of guardrails for the camera. So the camera, um, tries to move in the same direction as the player, but if it hits like a guardrail on the left or the top or the sides, it'll stop. And the reason is so that it doesn't we're not showing all the stuff on the side that we're not interested in, or the
Okay.
stuff on the bottom that we're not interested in. And that I think is it's not a perfect solution. I think that that was a legitimate challenge. But I think with a number of other systems that I put into the game, like a system that shows you where the moose danger is. So there's a system where you can toggle that on and off. So you could see like off-screen moose that might be pointing into your area. Um, that plus the better camera, I think, makes it a lot more playable on the on iOS devices. And so it also kind of depends on like what kind of phone you have. So some of the bigger screen phones, you can see a little bit more of the puzzle. Playing it intuitively, I felt like I could see enough of the puzzle. Like it's still very playable.
Okay.
So
Okay. How did you start porting, uh, technically speaking? Like you now need to interact with like rendering, right?
yep.
And Metal, it works both for iOS and Mac. Like it's
Yes,
the
it
same.
does. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So um and that's actually that was a fantastic segue because um I had originally the very first a year ago when I first made the game, I already started with a Mac with it available on Mac OS. And so when it launched on Steam, it was already available on Mac OS through Steam. And then like right after that, I made it available on Mac OS through the Mac App Store. And so there was already a Mac port when it first launched. And so then what I did when I went around to do the iOS port was I was like, hey, I bet there's a lot of crossover. There's probably more crossover and overlap between iOS and macOS than I might originally have thought. And indeed, it turned out to be the case, actually, that even if you look at the way I have this project organized, there's really an insane amount of overlap between the iOS and macOS platforms. Like the logic that does the rendering is almost exactly the same. The logic that does like the update and render loop is almost exactly the same, aside from a few like if defs for iOS and for macOS. The audio is almost exactly the same, except for like one small setting that's like different on iOS. And the shaders are exactly the same. All of that, like the core, like guts of it, the renderer stuff is pretty much exactly the same. And so there's ways of organizing your system so that you have all this overlap and shared code between the two platforms. So that was a huge advantage. There were smaller differences like on iOS, um, where you save the files is different because you've got to like save the files to the user's documents directories. Like that's like file IO is a little bit different. Um, you're gonna, excuse me, you'll have different like cloud sync kind of system that you'll have to put in. So cloud syncing, it's the same. People, believe it or not, they want to like keep their save file. So like, if they start on this, maybe they start on this iPhone and then they like, they move to like an iPad or something like that. They like to get their game save back and continue their progress. So I put that in and I used iCloud for that. So there's a surprisingly more overlap. I think if anyone who's watching that like wants to start on this, I would say start first with like just a Mac OS port, a Mac OS version of it. And then you can go and get it working nicely on Mac OS, launch on Mac OS, and then just you can basically take most of what you've done on Mac OS and use it on iOS. It's surprisingly similar.
Okay. So what were the challenging parts of the porting?
Um, well, actually, so if I was to look at like what took the most time, um, it was the new camera system and making sure that all of the game itself like looked good and that the camera actually worked and I could see the whole puzzle. That probably took the bulk of the time, but it wasn't the most frustrating because it was very, pretty straightforward problem. Like it's an actual like real engineering problem that's like, you know, I have control of the situation and if something goes wrong, it's actually my fault if it sucks. So I'm happy about that, right? But what I did not love about what I think was the most frustrating was just the submission and review process.
Oh yeah.
And that was
Okay.
absolutely that was atrocious. I mean, and it was time consuming, but it probably wasn't as time consuming as the other parts of porting the game, but it was, like, time consuming in this, like, really frustrating, like, existential crisis kinda way. You know what I mean? It's just like, what am I doing with my life? Like, why am I, sitting
Walk
here
me
like
walk me
what's that?
through. Walk me through the process because like I have some sort of, let's say, knowledge about it, but kind of like a very bits scattered bits around the system. And I just know that it like takes forever and they can like return to you, let's say you need to change something and then figure out what you actually need to change. So like walk me through the process.
Yeah. So let's say that I have a build of the game. Okay, like let's say that I've got an actual executable and it's running and this it's similar on Mac OS because you also have to submit to if you're going to submit to the Mac App Store, you have to do that too. And so it's a similar kind of process on Mac OS as iOS. But let's say that I have an executable and I've got and it works. It's I can play the game and I'm happy and I like what I see, okay? Like, and I want to ship this thing, right? Okay. Well, it isn't just an executable because to get any kind of game going on Mac OS or iOS even, you need more than just the executable. You also need the app bundle, which is really a fancy word for just a folder that contains all the stuff that's in it. So it's got, but that folder needs to be organized a very specific way. And so it's got to have directories laid out in a very specific way. And you can look all that information up. Like it is publicly available knowledge. And then, that's going to have like your asset packs in it. It's, like compressed assets in it. It's going to have all the various localization, all that stuff in it. So all of the contents of you get a bundle. Okay. So you've got a bundle and I'm running it. But then there's also this like code signing process that you have to do. So um, once you get the bundle built, and that's working. Then I also have to go and set up what's called provisioning profiles and a code signature for that particular executable, and that's like it's a communication system between you and Apple about sort of what's in your game, what kinds of permissions is it using, and so I use this provisioning profile to then sign the bundle, which once it's signed, you can't tamper with any of the contents on the inside. So it kind of it has ways of knowing what's inside of that bundle. And so you better not like sign it and then try and mess with it because then it will definitely not install. So I have to sign it and then once I have a once I have a bundle that is signed with the appropriate permissions for the appropriate distribution method which I intend. So there's different distribution methods for app bundles. So just for personal use, if I was to just put my app bundle on my iPhone, right? Like just like a debug build for Mooselutions on my phone, I would sign that with the debug or it's the development provisioning profile and then with that signed app bundle, I can then, well, you take the bundle and then you also have to turn it into what's called an IPA. It's not the beer. It's it's a, it's basically just like a compressed folder with your app bundle in it, and then that's what sort of allows you to install. I think actually you can also just install signed bundles straight from Xcode onto your device. So actually that part was not too bad. So if I get like the debug or the development bundle that's signed, I can just use Xcode to put it straight on my phone. Um, but when you actually submit to the App Store, you have a different sort of use a different signing provisioning profile. So you use the App Store distribution provisioning profile, and you sign that, and you have that app bundle, and then you submit that thing through a through this app called Transporter, and then Transporter it runs all these checks on your app bundle, and then it's the worst part of the whole process because if you screw it up and it's a total black box. Like what's going on is there's these systems running on Apple's servers. They're looking at the contents of your app bundle and they're like, we like this, we like that. Oh, we don't like that, but like we don't know why. Or like, it'll flag something wrong and then it'll spit out some error message. And then usually the error message has nothing to do with what's really going on. And so
On purpose?
no, not on purpose. I think just through sheer incompetence. So on
Okay.
their part, I think it's mostly like whoever is writing this thing just doesn't know how to make good error messages or like, or so one of the things that I kind of discovered about this process. So when you're making iOS apps, you have this thing called the info.p list, and basically all that is, it's just an XML file, okay, that's got like a bunch of settings for your app and it's got a bunch of relevant information for your app bundle. It's got things like a unique identifier for your app bundle. It's maybe got some information about the icons in it. It's maybe got some information about other frameworks that your app uses. It's got all that kind of stuff in it. Um, but what I found is interesting, and it's a P list, so like they call it a property list, which means that it's meant to be interpreted as a dictionary.
Okay.
Okay. So a dictionary, we typically think, it's like a hash table or like a key value sort of storage system. And so typically it's the case with like dictionaries and these kinds of things that it's not the order of the items in it doesn't really matter because typically what we're trying to do is we're trying to just use a key to get,
Yeah.
so like maybe like a bundle identifier is like a key and then what I get back is like the unique identifier for my game, right? So a key value store. We assume, we believe the abstraction as programmers, and we're like, I assume that it doesn't matter what order stuff I put in this P list, right? You just assume the abstraction works. Not the case when you submit your game to the App Store. Like they actually, like whatever algorithm's going in there is not really treating it like it's a dictionary. I'm pretty sure that it's just like serially going through that text file, and it's if it sees something in an order that it does, or if it sees something in a certain order and it doesn't like it, then it assumes it assumes that your app is in a certain state that it might not be. So basically what I've discovered in the app submission process, long story short, is you can't trust any of Apple's abstractions. Like if they say it's a dictionary, it's not a dictionary. They got some program that's going to read it like it's just a straight up text file serially. And so it actually does matter what order you put things in. And the way to do it, the way that I was able to submit any of this stuff. So the other part of it is that I'm a little bit of a weirdo because I decided that I was going to do my entire build system from scratch. I did not use So typically what most people when they do iOS apps, they do Xcode. And so they use like Xcode build. That's the name of the command line tool that you would use when you do a build through Xcode. And if you're just using Xcode as like say a graphical user interface program, right? Like you're actually using it to build your app, your mobile app, you would press a little like you'd press a little play button and that's like sort of like that what that does is that kicks off Xcode build underneath the hood, and it's going to like spit out your executable. And that's I preferred not to use that because I think it's kind of complicated and not so transparent about what it's doing, and it's not procedural in style, which is to say that I don't really know what it's doing in exactly what order. I can't really follow it, and I don't like that. So I opted with my own build system because I can follow through the script and I can be like, it's doing this and it's doing that and it's doing that, and I can understand it. So that's why I decided not to use Xcode build. But the advantage with Xcode build is that it makes sure that all your stuff in the P list is in the right order and it makes sure that your bundle is set up exactly in a way that Apple will accept it. And so if you opt out of that system, then you're kind of like off in this other land of like figuring out these obscure errors that the average person doing iOS apps would not run into.
Yeah.
So, long story short, if you really really want to like if you want to do your own iOS build system, I recommend that you just start with a default project from like a default project template that Apple would give you. So open up Xcode, start out with a default project template, and then you make sure that your build system spits out exactly the same thing that that default project. If you can do that, then you'll probably have something that their submission system will accept.
How much time have you poured into making your own build system?
Actually, it wasn't that it really wasn't that bad. Like, this is actually a conversation with my partner. He was like, you know, "I know you wanna do things your." But, it took about 3 weeks.
Okay.
Through 3 weeks to get, like, past the really bad submission. And so I guess I was kind of always working on the custom build system for a while. So, but then, like, and that part was happy because I was productive and I was like, "I've got a game and it's working and I'm happy and I'm playing it." But where it really started to come to a head in terms of, like, that particular design decision was when I needed to submit it, because my build system was not outputting something that Apple finds
Yeah.
kosher,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Uh, where do you think you are the only person in the world who has done this?
No, I can't be. There's gotta be other people that do this.
Sure.
I cannot be the only I mean, I might be the most vocal about it. I try and share, all of the stuff.
Have you found someone like when you were
No.
doing this? I think you
No,
might
I
be
mean,
the only one.
I can't be the no, like, there's gotta I'm guessing okay, I'm guessing maybe if you work at Epic Games and they like, whoever's working on the Unreal Engine, they're probably doing something like that. Or maybe, like, at Unity or something like that, where they have I'm guessing, out of Jonathan
So
Blow's studio, Tekla.
In Unity, when you're making a game and you want to publish this to iOS, you
Yeah.
export a project that you're supposed to open in Xcode and continue the process there.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah,
And so you have to hit the little play button.
yes, and you need to have a Mac, like so, like yeah. So like this
Interesting.
is in Unity, I wouldn't say so. Like they prepare the files, all right, but like then you need to switch for the code signing and everything. You need to switch to
So
Xcode
you
anyway.
like, Unity just absolves, like, they're like, "We're not touching it."
They're preparing the directory. So for example, they might prepare the plist file, but
Right.
like they at some point hand off to Xcode. So like you might be the only one actually, but I would be interested to see whether you are capable of finding someone who also done this.
Yeah, well, if I am, that would be interesting. I mean, it's a bit of a dubious honor because well, I just it was very frustrating. Like, I will admit that. And it's something that they do not conduct. Like, it's not that they say don't do it, it's just that nobody does it, and I think that everybody's justification for not doing it is, um, "Look at how frustrating this is."
Yeah,
Like, look at, it's setting but it's only frustrating because Apple makes it frustrating. It's not frustrating because it should be frustrating. It's frustrating because their app submission system, is a black box that is doing some kind of, it's looking at these text files and then it's coming to some determination and it's not giving clear enough of a clear enough report back of what's going on. And it's also, um, it's saying that all of these abstractions are going to work, but then they're actually leaky and broken abstractions that, you know, so they're kind of lying about how it works. So I could, again, I have total like sympathy as to like why somebody wouldn't do this. And if anything, I just want to like share with other people, um, hey, like, here's how I got it working. And so I actually do like, I'll give you the link for the GitHub project that I have. I try and like post I have an example of a build script that it worked.
nice.
Like, so what it is, it's like, this is my actual build script. This is like what I legitimately used to get this game on the iOS App Store. And that absolutely, like, that did the job. And you may have to tweak it here and there because every time there's a new version of Xcode, then there's going to be a new um, project template that you're going to have to start with, and then you're going to have now that that project template might not. I agree, it's egregious. It's bad. Like I 100% with you on that. Like I agree with you. Um, but like at the very least, maybe we don't have to be in a space where we have to. I actually I was not even aware that Unity like spits out a project. They're like, you deal with this.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. How long was the process? Like, if you measure the time of the actual porting, like thinking about the design, changing the screen, the camera, the inputs, and all of that,
Yeah,
and then the submission process, including your time, like 3 weeks of doing your own build system, which let's say it's like wild to say the least, okay, but still, let's include that. How much time was like in the actual development, designing or redesigning some of the parts, and how much was this like getting through the submission system?
about 3 months.
3 months for altogether.
Yeah, starting from the
Okay.
starting point where I was at, where I had already shipped it on macOS,
Okay.
and so having that pre-existing that I think is kind of one of the hard things about any of these time discussions, because it's kind of like if you built a skyscraper, but you already started from like a good foundation, then of course it's going to take less time to build the rest of the
Yeah.
skyscraper. But if you started to build it and you had no foundation whatsoever, then of course that will take longer. So it's a little bit hard to judge, was I good and productive? Because it's like I started from a pretty good foundation, right? I had already shipped it on Mac OS. I already had the metal rendering stuff there. I already had all of this pre-existing knowledge that I could then use. And so I think I started in early November, and then I got it to the App Store, right? But maybe it was like mid-November, and it was in the App Store by I think the second week in January of this year. And most of the time I would say was spent on adapting the camera system properly and making sure that all of the levels actually looked good. So most of it was just in improving the presentation, the visual presentation, so you could still solve the puzzles and you could keep the most of the level contained in the viewing space. That's where I spent the most of the work, and then a lot of the other work was, I'd say this the second largest portion was in the category that I would call apple guessing, which is just like, the build system. And I mean, even just to get it to work on iOS to begin with, like there was this um I had no visual output from the game at all, because apparently like you need to on iOS you need to have a launch storyboard. And so I assumed that you didn't need now, okay. I have another my friend Daniel Hooper. He used to work at Apple. We chit chat about this all the time, and he was like, "I don't think you need a launch storyboard. Like, you might not actually need it." And I was like, "Okay, cool." Um, but he might have a like there could be a way that's better than mine, but like I I tried maybe for a few days to get it to work without the launch storyboard and the main story. Like I was really gunning for a game like
Yeah.
for like a no storyboard. I'm telling you, I was like really trying, trying pretty hard. Couldn't get it to work. So I decided to cave and use a storyboard, and that was the only way that I was gonna get any kind of, like, visual output or get the game to launch. Or that's, like, another kind of unwritten rule about how to use their systems. And so, yeah, to us, that's ridiculous because, like, on Windows, we don't need a storyboard, and it's like thing just it boots up and it runs, and you've got a game and not a problem. But that's, like, a thing that you gotta do on iOS. So
Yeah.
here we are.
What did you have some sort of red flags in this submission process from humans, like regarding that you have something that is incorrect in the app and you need to change?
Nothing from humans. All the humans that I've worked with
Okay.
have been wonderful.
Okay.
If I am so lucky to work with a human being, so it's all been automated systems,
Okay.
right? So it's all of the automated systems, all these automated programs that Apple is running on their servers to look inside of your bundle and decide what they like and don't like, and then that sends back an automated rejection. That's where I had the bulk of my frustration. But in terms of the game, I mean, I think it's a very Apple friendly game. Like people, they it's a puzzle game. It's got difficult puzzle. It's good for kids, very kid friendly, like exactly the kind of thing that Apple, I think, once it gets into the hands of a human reviewer, it's something I think they would like.
Okay. 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 Nice. So when you look back on the whole process, what do you think of it? Like, first of all, what would you change in the process from the like, let's say their point of view, so that to make the for developers make it easier, and then from your point of view, would you adapt your process in any other way so that it like fits better?
Yeah, I think Apple needs to bring on some people who are more experienced in shipping cross-platform games. I think they need to um, accept, so like stop denying and just like accept that anybody that's making games does not just want to be exclusive to their platform. It's the nature of the business. It's a difficult business to be in. And so naturally, what we want to do is we want to take our existing workflows and we want to adapt it to, and we want to make it so our work goes on their platforms. We want that to be as simple and seamless as possible. So we don't want to have a bunch of vendor lock-in when it comes to putting our stuff on their systems. So they may try to incentivize vendor lock-in for other types of apps, but I think for games, they just really got to like stop doing that and just say like there is, maybe with games they make a separate pipeline that games go down, like a separate way of organizing the project or a separate kind of thing that's really only specific to games. So maybe if it's a game, uh we don't need any of this launch storyboard. We don't need any of that kind of stuff. It's really in terms of like how it interacts with the operating system. All that we really want to do is we want to open up a window and we want to start drawing our game's content into it. We want to start playing music or sounds from the game. So we really just want like the basic audio, video, and then touch input. And if they gave us a more streamlined process in terms of their own software development kits for how to do that, that would be great. So that's like the getting the game to work side. And then there's the on the app submission side, I think they just need to look more closely at these automated programs that are I think they just got to put better people on that. So what they need to do is any those systems, they're kind of like it's like writing a good compiler. Like I think the interface for a compiler is the error messages. Similarly, the interface for their app submission store system is the error messages. And so if they have somebody that's going in there, or they have a team that's going in there and they're looking at, okay, maybe what we have is we've got a program that we wrote that parses a p list, or this XML file that's going through all the different keys. Well, first problem is it shouldn't matter what order you put the keys in, right? Like, so we need to stay true and consistent to the abstractions that we advertise, right? Make sure that that's actually correct. But then also, if it finds something out of place, um, it should tell us what plist key it hit and where the problem is, like,
Yeah,
where's like,
at least
what's
that.
up, at least that, like, what's upstream of the error message, and, like, maybe just give us more of a dump of, like, what the reasoning process was that led the automated system to come to whatever conclusion. So I'm not saying that they have to all of the things that are inside of their automated system, definitely not, but, like, you gotta give us something. You gotta give us more than what you're giving us right now, and it's gotta be maybe structured a little bit better, and it's so, I think giving us enough information about what their system is doing. um, I also think that I really shouldn't have to open up a default template app project as a starting point to do my own build system. I think that because what I really want is something that doesn't change that often. I want something, I don't want it where it's like a few years go by and now there's a new Xcode and there's a new default template project and then it spits out this thing and like this is the new way that we you can't be changing that too much. So it should be mostly the same thing most of the time. And so I think that's a big part of it. Um, maybe just being more clear in the documentation about, hey, there is a way to do all of this without actually using Xcode, and you use all of these command line tools, and here's what that looks like. And we'll make sure that you always have those command line tools available to you to call from your build script. So just be more transparent about if you just didn't want to use X, like even just to like openly say like it's a viable option to not use Xcode build at all, and we understand why you wouldn't want to use it. And now we're going to give you some support for like not using it. That would be, I think that would be a much better direction. But so, if anyone wants to hire somebody,
Nice. What about your process? Would you adapt it now, like knowing things you know now? Would you like rewrite your build system again, or would it be for a new Xcode template? Or
um, I would say that like when a new project, so I actually don't think that. So let's pretend that like 3 years go by. Okay, so we're talking to each other 3 years from now, and I put another game on iOS. Um, I don't think that the new, project template that they come up with is gonna be that much different from what it is now. So, I will have to adapt my build system, I'm sure. I'll have to take that and I'll have to swap a few things around, but I don't think it'll be that much different. So, it'll just be an annoyance,
yeah,
if anything. It's an annoyance that I would rather not have, but I but I think the hardest part is doing it the first time. The hardest thing is just getting the submission correct and getting it through the first time. And then once you've got that as a baseline, I'm guessing that in a few years, I won't have to do that much extra work.
okay,
So,
okay. Okay, we're closing the porting part. Do you have anything from this subject that you want to bring up?
um, gosh, anything else? I do feel like it was worth it. Like it may not have brought in like a ton of sales, but I think as an engineer and like for me, it felt good to kind of come full circle because a lot of this started off as like me telling like my iOS friends, like, you guys are doing it the wrong way. Like things should be cross platform and they shouldn't be like cross platform in this like crappy React Native way. They should be cross platform in this like other way. And so to me, it feels good to like finally finish that character arc and be like, I did it. Like I made a game that is available on Windows and Mac OS and iOS, and I managed to stay sane in the process, and I didn't use crazy things like React Native. So this feels good.
Okay, okay. Now, tell me a little bit about your future projects. What do you want to do? What is your state of some prototypes?
Yeah, sounds great. I really want to do some kind of crafting automation game like Factorio. I absolutely love that game. I have clocked way more hours in that game than really any game that I own.
How many?
So 500
Ooh,
is
okay.
probably pretty bad. It's it's a bit of an obsession. Um, but I want to. So I'm looking at some different angles. I want to do one that's based on biology actually. So I want to do one where maybe what you're setting up or your base is more kind of like biological in nature. Maybe it takes place inside of a cell, or maybe it takes place inside of some kind of an organism with all of the problems that come with transporting nutrients around, that kind of thing. Um, so design wise, I've started prototyping that, but basically right now I'm in a state where I'm just taking all the old code from previous games and scraping all of that out and just having like a clean space to work from. So that's kind of where I'm at. And I was prototyping a different game for the last year that I thought was just kind of a funny joke game. It was my roguelike deck builder where you literally build a deck and you have your neighbors attack you.
Yeah.
Um, I got decently far with that. I think I got annoyed with some aspects of it though because I I didn't feel like it had that much depth to it, to be honest. That I think that's my biggest like I got pretty far, like where you could actually build the deck and you could get upgrades and like the neighbors would come after you and you could shoot them away from your deck and you were like harvesting trees and it's like there's still like there's like a little playable prototype out there, but I felt like the deck building itself did not have a ton of depth to it. And so I think I still want like a building game in that vein, but if I were to compare that to say like Factorio's got so much depth with the building, with how you lay out the machines, and every single time that you put a machine down, it's kind of like solving a little puzzle. And so that's more of what I want. Yeah. So I think I'm actually going to be able to take a lot of things from that last prototype that I was making and reuse it in the next game prototype. So it's not like a total loss. I think there's a bunch of stuff that's pretty similar or like there's overlap there. Um, but yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to play around with a some kind of a biology based automation game of some kind. And it hits a little bit personal to me because of the heart surgery that I had. And so I kind of realized when I was about to go in and get, like, operated on, I was like, "Wow, like, everything I know and care about depends on this pump." And, like, if that pump goes, man. So I wanna make a game that's kinda got a little bit of that feel to it.
Okay.
Like, maybe it deals with, like, circulation as a, like, problem, and, like, you've gotta solve that. So that's really where my head's at. But that's just one idea. So I had another concept. There was this, like, much older game prototype that I was working on that's actually some of the gameplay from that is in that, video that I had, the ho Why You Should Learn to Program the Hard Way. Um, I wanna I wanna take that and make that not so much a puzzle game and maybe turn that into some kind of a crafting game or something like that. So, I had
How?
considered how? I think that that game had this mechanic where you had this, like, robot kinda, like, walking around.
Yeah.
And he had this, like, little selection area that way he would
Yeah.
have in front of him, and then you could select things from the world, you could place it down. Um, one of the things that I noticed actually and I got pretty far in terms of, like, constructing some of those puzzles. I got to about, like, 25-ish puzzles, and I started having, like, moving blocks. So there was, like, gravity blocks is kinda what I called them. They were blocks where you could select them, and then they would act like a platform. And so I could place it like one of these blocks in front of me, and maybe it's got like little arrows pointing up. And if I'm standing on it, then like I have created a platform that I can um I've created like a little elevator or something that I can stand on. It'll go up. So like one of the things that I noticed actually was it was possible to craft an elevator using the blocks that were available in that game. And it was not like a crafting system that's like really top down. It was sort of like an emergent crafting system. So what I could do, one of the things I could do is I could um if I had like a little block that's like it's got up arrows, it's like a little like elevator that goes up. And then like maybe I have like a little block that stays in place. Okay. And if I can find a way to put them all in that selection area where like the one thing that's like holding it in place is standing on top of the block that's the up elevator block, and I can select all of it as a whole, then what I have in my inventory is an elevator that I can place anywhere. And so if I like walk around and I put this elevator down, then the way that I get the elevator is I stand on top of this thing and I select out the block that was holding it in place, and now I have an elevator. And so that just kind of got me thinking about maybe this isn't a puzzle game. Maybe this could be some kind of like Metroidvania crafting kind of game or something, something where the crafting system is not top down. What I mean by that is like in Minecraft or Factorio or like a lot of these kind of crafting kind of games, like there's typically a recipe and you know beforehand what the what the recipe is going to produce. So if I put the stuff in the thing and the recipe, and it follows the recipe, then like the output is this other thing, right? And that beforehand. A lot of times you have to set the recipe, but this is more like you're crafting things, but I'm not going to tell you what things you can craft up front. Like it's just kind of a natural emergent thing that's a part of this world. And so it's up to you to discover the things that you can craft um, using what's available in this world.
Yeah.
So that's kind of I want to explore that a little bit more. And so I want to kind of what I'm doing is I'm taking that previous game prototype and I'm um, removing all the puzzle stuff, like the stuff that's like more about hard puzzles, and trying to go more in this direction of like, what if this were some kind of a crafting game and what would that look like?
Have you seen Mars First Logistics?
I have not, but I will play it. Mars First Logistics.
Yeah. So there's this element of bottom-up crafting there where you have like physically accurate parts and you build vehicles and you move around
Oh
Mars. I
yeah.
have a cute rendering style.
Yeah, see, no, that sounds exactly like yeah, so it's what you're making, you're kind of like putting together this sort of like monstrous machine. And I guess like what's the game? The latest Zelda game is kind of like that because you have you
Okay.
sort of end up making these machines by sticking things together. And it's kind of a similar thing.
How,
Um
how much time do you devote to a prototype to kind of, let's say, acknowledge whether the prototype has any future?
yeah, I spend way more time in that space than I think a lot of the rest of it. Cause like what I'm looking for is usually some real depth to it, some real scope to the amount of gameplay. So, um, it, I think if you looked at like my output, like probably for years and years, it would probably look like I don't do much, and that's fair. It's like fair enough because like a lot of what I do is like I'm trying out a lot of different gameplay ideas, and I'm doing it sort of in this low fidelity way. And so, um, with Mooselutions, like that game, it's obviously much smaller in scope, but it was about a year of just prototyping levels, and that was while working a job, so I was able to kind of do it sort of as like a side thing. If I was doing it full time, maybe it would have taken less time than that, but I think similar, like you can't really. I've probably said this before, but you always have to separate the creative side of it from the production side of it. And so the creative side, it really goes at a different pace. It's not something that is going to happen. You're not going to always be turned on to it every single day. You're not always going to have a lot of ideas, and you just can't force that to happen. So that happens basically the way I look at it is like that happens at its own pace. And once I collect enough stuff, enough scope, enough like good ideas that actually work together, then I can make a decision to take a prototype from something that's just um a bunch of ideas and then actually like polish it down and focus it into something that's a real game. So that's it it could take a long time to do
Yeah.
any of that the actual prototyping stuff. And I can't really say when I will have the next thing that I'm happy with or like when, I'll have enough, when there's like enough of it to have a real game there. But the 2D platformer game earlier, I think I called it Cove Kid. I'm gonna call it something else. Um, that actually had some decent depth to it, so I was happy about the depth to it, unlike the my roguelike deck builder prototype, which is more just a joke. That was like "Hey, this might be a funny joke," but, you know, it as I've learned that trying to make a game based on just a funny joke is probably not the best approach because, like, then there's what's the depth? Like, what are the actual like, what's really there for the player, like, that's interesting? So, I think I'm I can't I can't make a game that doesn't have depth. It's not in my nature to do that, and so I know that that's a thing that is a profitable business. There are people that do that, and I think that's great. Um, it's just not really something that I can do. So I will spend a very large if it takes me years and years to, like, prototype this idea, maybe while prototyping a bunch of other ones and figuring out that, then I'll just do that, and I'll be okay with it.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Are you prototyping with C++ with the usual stack?
yeah, yeah, for the most part, I tend to prefer to I don't want my prototype to be different from or all that different from the thing that I actually end up shipping, and so I want I would find it frustrating because I know there's people that do this. They prototype, like, on Unity, and then they maybe move it over to their own engine, or I've seen other people prototype on oh gosh, what's that? It's that tiny like, the thing that they use for the Celeste prototype, the original Celeste prototype. It was
Uh,
Pico 8,
yeah. Yeah.
Pico 8. So, yeah, so they use the Pico 8, and then they, like, make a little game prototype with that, and then they're like, "Oh, okay, let's make this real." I would rather just I would find it frustrating and be like, "But now I gotta, like, redo all this stuff." I don't wanna do that. I would much rather just start with a more simplified version. Maybe, like, the graphics suck, they're just, like, placeholder graphics. There's the audio is terrible or maybe it's got all these problems, but at least, like, you get the gameplay idea across. And then from there, it really is not that much. It's pretty easy to take an existing prototype, or it's a lot easier to take something that's it's in your preferred way of doing things. It's in your stack or whatever, and then you gradually make it work, make it look better, solve all those you know, all the things like people expect their menus for their volume controls and all that stuff that you should never do at the very beginning of a project. So,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
easier.
So you're not experimenting with new languages then, programming languages.
Um, so I guess my stance on that is, um, once I finish my next game so first of all, like, Jai is not publicly available, right?
Yes.
I think it's still in a beta. Um, I think I tried Odin at one point. I do like it. I think at that time that I tried it, which is maybe a few years ago, I had some difficulty with debugging, and so I was gonna start a new prototype with that language and that stack, but, I found some difficulty with debugging, and so and then some of the others, I just was not really presented with a solid case as to why that would be better than what I'm presently doing. I think another thing too is, like, I know Casey Muratori talks about this a lot. Um, it's a big cost
Yeah.
to switch out your engine and to, like, to redo it. So you better be darn sure that you have something that's great, that, like, is something that you're absolutely gonna be thrilled to work with in the future. And I am not thrilled with C++, like, I'm not thrilled with the direction that the language is going. I hate a lot of it, and there's, like, a lot of it that I don't use, and there's a lot of it that I don't even know about. As I've said, like, but if I'm just using it basically as like a C compiler or just to do like, C flavored C++, it's got a lot of things it doesn't have a lot of things that I know I would want, but it's okay. It's fine to use. Um, I think if I get to a point where like maybe I finish this project or the next one, and then if Jai is publicly available, then I think, start the next project with that publicly available version. But I'm not really the kind of guy that, um, I I enjoy programming, but I don't wanna be the guy that's, like, kind of doing debugging and testing on someone else's stuff, because I wanna make I think, like, making my own products comes first and foremost, and the technology is really just one aspect of it. Um I think it's usually not the most interesting aspect. I think the most interesting aspect is the design. That's the hardest part, and that's the part that's gonna really determine whether you actually make any money or not, is how good is your design? Um, what You know, so it a poorly designed game or like a game design that nobody wants, in a flashy new language is not really gonna it's not where I put my attention, I guess is what I would say.
Okay. Okay, okay. Then lastly, I would like to ask about Better Software Conf. Are you prepared?
Yeah. I'm giving a talk. I have yet to decide exactly what I want to talk about. Maybe this could be our little like um I've sort of committed to talking about the iOS thing. I'm not entirely sure if that's like the most interesting thing, but it is like you said, maybe I am the only person who has done. So if that actually turns out to be the case, then cool. Maybe I'll talk about how to properly Apple guess and that kind of thing. But I did also want to talk about maybe more of a game design thing or like um, a problem that I found with making puzzle games and why I want to branch out more into the automation game space or more of the crafting game space. Um, Something that's not explicitly a puzzle game or like why I'm kind of more interested in that because I think puzzle games have this weird problem where I think among a certain kind of like wine sniffing crowd, they're very enjoyable and like there's people that absolutely love these games and they should love them. But then if I look at my actual behavior, so like in principle, I know that I'm part of this wine sniffing club and I love these kinds of games. But then like secretly at home, I like put my wine glass down and I'm playing Factorio for 500 hours. So like what's going on with that? Like what's the deal, right? And like and so why is that? And I think this is actually like part of the problem. Like um we have these high ideals, but then in terms of but we also have to sell games and we have to make something that people really not just say that they want to play when they're like with their cool friends, but like something that they instinctually, as biological beings created by evolution, are drawn to naturally. And so um, I think the Factorio style game, or I think games that are more open ended, it's not that they don't have puzzles in them. It's just that the way that the puzzle solving is presented is more open-ended and also has all these other aspects that scratch these evolutionary itches better. So I think if your goal was to make something more profitable, I think, you would wanna take the same deep design ideas that are present in some of these great puzzle games that you love or that I love, and you wanna put that in a world that also scratches the evolutionary itches. And I think that's really the direction we wanna go. And so I guess I'm frustrated with, like, what I would call the puzzle game museum experience. It's like there's great gameplay in there, but it's like a museum. It's kind of like you move from, like, one exhibit to another, and you never break out of that you don't break out of the museum. And so when I play these other games, when I play games like Factorio, I feel like I'm still doing a lot of those same puzzle solving things, but I'm not stuck in the museum. And I'm genuinely curious about how we push game design in that direction, I guess. So those are my two things I'm thinking about talking about.
Okay, okay. Nice, nice. Okay then. I have one question, but I really try not to make the show political. This will be
Okay.
like a little bit. So you left X, and I guess you wanted to have a bit like being on X makes your worldview, I think, usually more negative because like there's a lots of news that are catchy are
There's an
often
algorithm that promotes things that are controversial.
yeah. So when you left X, do you think like your mental health improved?
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say even some of the discords that I've been a part of, I think um it's not that I don't want to have like the online relationships. I think it's just more that I want to have online relationships that progress into like real life relationships, and where we actually meet up in real life and we do things. And so um but I'll sort of bracket off like Twitter and just kind of say that I I found it frustrating that the things that I said that did the best had nothing to do with anything that I was working on, and was just like, tied to some controversy. And so that just got very frustrating. And then I just found like myself getting sucked kind of into this vortex of, um, debating this software idea or that idea with people that are really not that interested in actually having like the genuine debate. Kind of like what I was saying earlier about how a lot of people have these opinions about how to do something in software, but then they've like never tried the alternative. And so they don't really know what they're talking about. Um, so there's just a lot of that kind of discussion on Twitter, and it's very easy to get sucked into it. And the algorithm promotes any kind of these sorts of disagreements between people. And so I I just don't think it's a good use of time. I think there I, I've just kind of, and like, they profit off of you wasting your time, basically. So I don't wanna give them the money from that, to be honest. Like, I don't think that they deserve the money from stealing people's attention in that kind of negative way, and, like, from creating all of this fallout. And I sort of feel a similar way about a lot of different social media. I think it's essentially a predatory business model, and all of us would probably be wise to reconsider, because, I spent a fair amount of time on that, and I probably said a lot of stuff, and, um, got fired up about a lot of stuff, but ultimately it did nothing for my, like, if you think it's gonna do anything for your, like, business, it's not. It almost certainly will not. Like, that what matters in making games and putting them out there is, like, did you make a design that sort of scratches the right evolutionary itch? And then Steam will promote the hell out of that. If Gabe Newell is like, "Hey, this is making us a lot of money," then Gabe is like, "Let's go make money.
Oh
And if
yeah.
you get like this many sales, then I'm gonna send you a $300 box of chocolates every Christmas." And so like, that's where you should be focusing. You should be focusing on the Steam algorithm, not on the Twitter algorithm, and not on the YouTube algorithm. And if you're making games, and so that's like the biggest reason for me was, okay, like I figured out, something that how to get that algorithm going, but like I think the Steam algorithm is what I should be paying more attention to.
All right. Then let's do a last round of shout out to Mooselutions and all the platforms you can get Mooselutions at. So this is PC on Steam, Mac on App Store natively and through Steam, and now iOS
Yeah,
included.
iOS. Give it a shot. If you like it, leave a review. I would appreciate it. Helps out their algorithm too. So if Apple is, gets the signal that it's making a bunch of sales, then they'll start promoting it more too. So
Ted,
I enjoyed this conversation. This is great. I really appreciate it. So
thank you. Thank you for joining me, Ted. This was really lovely. I liked it a lot.